Hey there, Pastor Marc here. It's our prayer that this message would encourage and equip you in your relationship with Jesus. We're able to provide this content due to the joyful generosity of our financial partners. And if you'd be willing to join that tribe and help get some sermons like this around the world, you can donate at harvestbaptist.info/give. God bless. Well, I'm going to give you both the most original and unoriginal sermon you've ever heard this morning. As I began to ask myself, man, how do God's people celebrate God's miracles? I just thought, you know what? As I studied and looked, I'm just going to preach on that. And I'm going to give you this morning a very simple sermon called They Celebrated How. And my points are literally from the title. Point number 1 is they. Point number 2, celebrated. And point number 3 is how. I want to start with they. They celebrated how, but they celebrated. You say, what do you mean? Well, if you look in Leviticus, specifically chapter number 23, and I could take you to 20 different occasions where you see this in the Bible, I'll just use this as one example. You would find something like this written many, many times. Leviticus 23, look in verse number 7. The children of Israel, God's people, are told in the first day that they would have a holy convocation. You shall do no servile work therein. They're told that you're going to have on the first day, you're going to have a holy convocation. The next verse, verse number 8, you shall offer an offering made by fire unto the Lord for 7 days, and then the seventh day, that's going to be a holy convocation. You're not going to work on that day either. You say, okay, great. What's a convocation? That's interesting. Why is it holy? Well, what God's saying is that they're going to have a holy day, a set apart day, a sanctified day. And a convocation is basically the assembly. A convocation means this isn't a private thing. This is something that you're all going to do together. This is going to be a set apart day, and there's several of them. These are going to be set apart days for the entire congregation to come together. This is not a day for work. This is not a day for you to be productive. This is a day that's set aside for you to stop, for you to remember me, and I want to be sure, when he says convocation, I want to be sure that everyone does it together. Now, this is so important for us. Pastorally, I get the sense, and whether my pastoral senses are accurate or not, I don't know, but more often than not, they are accurate. I get the sense that there is maybe a growing divide in our church, and that there are starting to be two basic groups of people. There's a group of people that were here 3 years ago that went through a capital campaign together. We had focus group meetings, and we had like 20-something of them. I was sick of them by the time we were done with them, and you were probably sick of me announcing them by the time we were done with them. And you got to come and put in your input. And we took that input, we put it together, and we shared our plans. And then from that, we had meetings, not one, but like a billion of them. They were individualized meetings at your house or coffee shops or here. And not everyone did that, but there were a lot of meetings where we sat down and we shared, here's where we think God's leading us over the next 3 to 5 years as a church. And would you buy into the vision? And many of you came to focus group meetings and you sat down in individual meetings and you caught the vision and you heard about the plans and you made a pledge, or you wrote a check, or you began to give, or maybe you're still giving, and you did that, right? Then there's another group in our church who's like, I didn't do that, right? Maybe you weren't here then. That's no fault of your own. You weren't here. How could you have participated? But like, I'm brand new. I don't know anything about that. That's news to me, right? Or maybe you were here. Maybe you were here for whatever reason. There was health issues at the time, or you were just super busy, or perhaps you talked yourself into, well, I don't have much money to give, so my voice isn't as important, so I'm not really going to participate. Or perhaps you just weren't into the vision. That's a possibility. You know, I'm not naive when it comes to pastoring, that there are people that are like, I like it the way that it is. I don't really want to grow. I don't want to change. I don't want to expand. And that's, at some level, an understandable mindset. I don't like that mindset. I wouldn't recommend it, but I understand it to some degree. But if you're not careful, you can start to get groups. One group that's real enthused about what's happening financially and the projects and what God's doing and expanding and reaching people, and another group that's maybe a little less enthused. And the little less enthused group might start to say, well, this is their win. Right? This is their win to celebrate. These are miracles for them. This is something that they're more into, or they participated deeper. I haven't given any money to that, so this isn't my win, and I want to put an end to that right now. No. This is our win. This is a team win, right? When the children of Israel had God show up and do miracles, there were people that led in it. There were people that had certain participation levels that were more than others, but they celebrated together. When the men went out and they took a city with God's leading and they went to battle, the women and the children celebrated with the men as if it was their victory together. When the Passover happened, 10, 20 generations later, the children of Israel were still celebrating the Passover as if it was a communal win for them. They were 1,000 years removed from when God did that, but they still celebrated it as though it was their win, because it was their win. And I want us to know they had a holy convocation. They had the entire assembly, God said, get together and celebrate. So today is a day for all of us, no matter how long you've been here, whether it's been a week or a year or 10 years or longer, no matter how much money you've given or you've given, that doesn't matter. Today, it is about the group saying, look at what God has done and is doing. This is something for us to do together. I want to show you a picture. I'm curious to know, anyone just by this picture, anyone know who this is? Raise of hands. I know a few of you will. All right, somebody, Joe and John, who is that? Bill Mazeroski. Maz, as they called him. The Hall of Famed Pittsburgh second baseman who hit the single greatest swing of a bat in World Series history. At least that's what they've dubbed it. 1960. I don't remember this, but some of you remember this. I wasn't alive back then. But in 1960, in the World Series, Game 7 at Forbes Field in Pittsburgh, the severe underdog Pittsburgh Pirates were taking on the juggernaut of the New York Yankees. Bottom of the ninth, game tied up, 1 ball, no strikes. That second pitch and that swing of the bat from Maz, who really wasn't known for his bat. I mean, he's in the Hall of Fame really for his glove. He was an amazing defenseman. But that swing of the bat sent the ball some 430-ish feet over left center field. And Yogi Berra and Mickey Mantle raced as fast as they could to see if they could catch that ball, but they could not. Over the ivy wall, into Shinley Park, home run, Pirates win the pennant. There's an iconic photo from that moment where Maz rounded the bases and he came from third base into home plate. They say that if you were there, it was just pure joy. I love this picture because there's like this businessman in a suit next to a little kid who's like 11 years old and the team, and they are all just celebrating together. Now, Bill hit the home run, but it was a team win. If you played in the game, you got a ring on your finger. If you sat the bench and you didn't play, you didn't catch a ball, you didn't swing a bat, you did nothing, you got a ring on your finger. We were talking about this in staff meeting. Joe brought this up. He said even the ball boy got a ring on his finger. It was a team win, right? They didn't look at the participation levels and say, well, he did that, and he did that, and he did that, so we're going to divvy this up. This isn't your win as much as it's our win. No. It's a team win. The children of Israel understood when God did miracles in their midst, that this is a team win, and we better understand as a church, they celebrated. This is a team win. When God does miracles of salvation, when God does financial miracles, this is for all of us to say, let us rejoice and let us celebrate together. They celebrated. But they celebrated. You say, what do you mean they celebrate? I mean, they celebrated. If you look even just at the text we just read in Leviticus, God's like, no work today. Now, this is a day that's set apart where you're going to remember, where you're going to relax, where you're going to have a good time. This is not a day for you to go be productive. This is a day for celebration. My thinking has been most formed on this topic by a man by the name of Richard Foster. Richard Foster wrote a lot of books. I don't even agree with all of them, but he wrote one by the name of Celebration of Discipline, which sounds like a really weird title. Sold probably 2 million plus copies, Celebration of Discipline. The last chapter of the book, he finally tells you why he named the book Celebration of Discipline. The whole book is about the spiritual disciplines, about reading your Bible and fasting and praying and all these things. But the last chapter is on celebration. And Foster argues several, I think, very salient points from the book. Number one, he says, God's people celebrated when God did big things, which he's right. But he goes on to say that celebration is kind of a lost art in our culture, that there are some celebrations we have, but more and more, we are losing our sense of gaiety, festivity, just letting loose and having a good time. He actually begins to quote several different people, and there's one in particular, Harvey Cox, that said that the modern man is so pressed hard toward useful work and rational calculation that he's all but forgotten ecstatic celebration. That was his argument. We're so pressed into being rational and being useful and being productive that we've almost lost our imaginative faculties, our celebrative faculties, that we've lost that. And this is what Foster says about us needing more celebrating. He begins to argue that there are benefits. There were benefits for God's people way back when in the children of Israel. There were benefits in the early church. There were benefits if you look at Revelation and some of the celebrations that will happen there. He says there's benefits. And this, I want to read to you what Foster says, because it's, to me, so important. He says, far and away, the most important benefit of celebration is that it saves us from taking ourselves too seriously. He says, this is a desperately needed grace. It's an occupational hazard of devout folk to become stuffy bores. I love that line. I've met some devout stuffy bores in my life. He said, this should not be. Of all people, we should be the most free, the most alive, the most interesting. Celebration adds a note of gaiety, festivity, hilarity to our lives. Let go of the everlasting burden to always need to sound profound. I love that. A man who says, you know what's good for God's people to do sometimes? There are times where we fast. There are times where we weep for souls and we pray, but there are times where we celebrate. There are times where we let our hair down and we have fun, and there is just a note of celebration and joy that takes over our lives. And really, if you put Foster and what he argues all together, he argues basically a line from a very ancient church father, Augustine, who said that the Christian should be an alleluia from head to foot. His argument was that Christians should be the most joyous people. Christians should be the people who have the most to celebrate in all of life, because celebration brings joy and joy makes us strong. Nehemiah was more than onto something. He was dead onto something when he said, the joy of the Lord is my strength. Celebration brings joy. Singing brings joy. And that joy provides strength to us. Proverbs wasn't wrong when it told us that a merry heart doeth good like a medicine. Right? There's an old adage that really comes from that. It's derived from that laughter is the best medicine. Why do we say that? What we're saying is that the celebration and the joy and the laughter, that these things literally have an effect on us physically. Like there's hormones and all kinds of chemical responses that happen when you just start to laugh and you start to celebrate and you start to have a good time. Sometimes when you're in a hard time, the best thing you can do is actually just to carve out some moments where you can celebrate and you can just have some joy. Today, we are doing that as a church family. Together, we are what? We are celebrating. There's a book actually written by the name of a man by the name of Norman Cousins. He calls it Anatomy of an Illness, and I don't think that I don't think he's a doctor, or he really is trying to give you the most medicinal book in the world, but he just gives you his own experience. Cousins had an illness that he could not be healed of. It just was completely debilitating him. He was in the hospital, and a huge part of it was his sleep. He was in so much pain that he couldn't sleep well, his body couldn't recover well, and it was just this spiral. And Harvey began to set aside time to watch silliness, basically, like candid camera videos and like America's Funniest Home Videos, stuff like that. And he began to set aside time almost like it was his workout regimen where he would watch these and laugh. That was his goal. His goal was to laugh. And he found, just anecdotally, that when he laughed, there was almost this anesthetic effect that began to take away his pain, and he slept much better. He was so into it that the doctors began to run blood tests before and after he would have his laughing fits. And what they found was that there were many blood levels and things like actually on a biochemical level that he was healthier because of his laughing. And he claims that he healed himself by laughter. That's his claim. The joy and the festivity and the laughing was something that produced some sort of physical benefit for him. If you have an ailment, am I suggesting that you go have laughing fits? That's not exactly what I'm suggesting. What I am suggesting, though, is that celebration was something that was at the core of what God's people did on many moments and occasions on a regular basis all throughout ancient Old Testament Israel, all the way to the church, and it should be a part of our lives. It should be a part of our church's lives. This is why we do church picnics. This is why we're going to have brunch today. It's a day of celebration. So they celebrated. How did they celebrate, though? Well, I already gave you really the sum total of it when we started this morning. How did they celebrate? A few ways. Number one is they feasted. You know what the Passover is still? You ain't going hungry at Passover. It's a feast. So much so that God wrote these words when he implemented the Passover in Exodus. He told them in Exodus 12, verse number 4, that if your house is too little for the lamb, I'm telling you to go kill the lamb, and you're going to have a lot of meat from this. You're going to be able to eat. Let him and his neighbor next to his house take it according to the number of souls. What is he saying? He's saying, you may have so much food that it's way too much for your house. So if you want to combine households, that's fine. You can do it with one neighbor, but you're going to have a lot of food. That's what he's saying. That was purposeful. He's like, God wasn't into wasting all the food, but there was going to be a lot, and nobody was going hungry. He was willing to tell them, there's going to probably be some leftovers. You may want to combine forces here because there's going to be so much. The Passover eventually went on to be known really kind of that time of year as the Feast of Unleavened Bread. They named it a feast. If you study what God told them to begin to implement as they went on through the wilderness wanderings, they were told to memorialize every single year the Feast of Tabernacles. And while they moved out of their homes in temporary booths, and that was a downgrade, the food was nothing but a downgrade. They feasted. Pentecost was known as the Feast of Weeks because there they ate together. If you know anything about Purim, that God didn't ordain Purim, but it's something that the Jews have rightfully celebrated for a long time. You know there's a lot of food involved. Think of your favorite holidays. I'm willing to bet that most of you would have somewhere towards the top of your list either Christmas, Easter, Thanksgiving, and what do we associate with those holidays? We associate a lot of food. And for good reason. Part of celebration is actually digging in and saying today's not a day for fasting. Today is a day, not to be gluttonous, but today is a day of feasting. So today we feast. We are going to Lobby Hall, and let me tell you, we're not going to go hungry. I was there last night. I saw freezers full of food. I mean, it's crazy how much food there's going to be there. And there's so many chairs and tables set up. It's going to be awesome because we're going to feast. Are we us going to Lobby Hall having brunch? Are you saying that's biblical? That's exactly what I'm saying. When you celebrate, you feast. And today, I'm here to declare that if you started a diet with a New Year's resolution, you get a 1-meal pass, okay? No diets. I can't take away your gluten restrictions. I'm not that powerful. But I could take away no diets today. No calories don't count today, okay? We're going to feast. Why? Because we're going to celebrate together. They feasted. Not only did they feast, they sang. Look at what God did at the Red Sea. He delivers them, Exodus 14. Next verse in Exodus 15. They then sang Moses and the children of the Israel their song to the Lord. The first ever lyrical song recorded, like the lyrics to a song, first we ever have. are right here in Exodus 15, where God did a miracle for them. God provided for them, and they sang. If you keep reading, they danced as well, but I figured we're Baptists. I was going to leave that out today. A bridge too far. Maybe next year. I'm kidding, kind of. They sang. They sang together. We had more music today than normal, on purpose. Why? Because it's when you sing, there's joy, there's merriment that should come from that. When you start to think about what God's done in your life through the lyrics of a song, man, that's a beautiful thing. How did they celebrate? Well, they feasted. They sang. They also, they memorialized it. I think this is so important. If you look in Joshua, when God does another miracle and he parts the Jordan River and they officially go into the promised land, there's almost this magical moment that happens that God tells them to do. They didn't think of it on their own. God tells them, look, go back in the middle of that river and get you 12 big stones, one for each of the tribes, carry them out of that riverbed and put them on the bank, and I want you to make a monument, an altar. I want you to pile those stones up. And he tells them why. He says, that's going to be for remembrance, that there are going to be people that come after you. And they look and say, wow, those big old stones piled up. That marks where God did a miracle. That marks where God took us across the Jordan. It's there to be a memorial. Part of the reason we have put today together, part of the reason there's been a little bit of secrecy of what exactly are we celebrating, what's going to happen. Although I must tell you, it's so good to have the cat out of the bag because I've been busting at the seams for 2 months now. And it takes everything I have not to tell a secret. So I'm glad that that's done. But why the fanfare? Why do we do it? What we're trying, as best we know how, to make a memory. There's a lot of Sundays that we do as a church, and if you fast forward 5 years, you're not going to remember all of them. You're just not. But there are certain occasions where God shows up where you want to put an impression, right? You want to make a core memory. You want to have something that people say, I remember that day. Man, I remember that song, Victor and Josh and them singing it. Man, that was beautiful. And the choir and the video. And Derek was in that video. And we went to lobby. I remember that day. You want to memorialize certain things. So today, as best we know how, is our probably feeble attempt, but attempt nevertheless, to memorialize a day. And you can bet your bottom dollar, we will memorialize what God has done in the life of our church over the last few years in a physical way moving forward. I don't know exactly what that looks like. We've started some conversations about what physical marker can we put on our campus that would serve as a memorial that everyone who's here during these days would see that on a regular basis and say, I remember those days. That reminds me of back in 2025 and 24 and 23. Like, I remember those days. I remember that capital campaign. I remember the money. I remember God showing up. I remember that. I don't know exactly what it'll be, but it won't be a plaque that's 5 by 8. I'll tell you that much. It'll be something that is significant, that's on our campus where we can remember, and people that come after us can say, what's that about? We can say, listen, that represents when God showed up and did something. It's important to memorialize, even in your own family and in your own family's history, to find the significant moments and to mark those moments. So we mark these moments, and we say we celebrate what God's doing. But then they prayed. The most beautiful example of this, I think, is in Chronicles. It actually was kind of a building program where God had supplied just abundantly and beautifully for his people. David got all the supplies together, and his son Solomon built the temple. And when it's all said and done, they have basically a memorial service. They stop and they start to celebrate and they start to sing, but they start to pray. And Solomon actually, if you read the text, gets down on his knees, it says, and he lifts his hands to the heavens and just begins to pray. One of the most beautiful prayers you'll ever read is there in 2 Chronicles chapter number 6. And the sum total of the prayer is this: God, thank you for what you have done. They look back and they say, man, you have amazed us. And then Solomon ends the prayer by saying, God, keep on working on our behalf. God, don't let it end today. Let us continue to see you at work in our midst, in our congregation. That's more or less, I'm summarizing, what he prayed. I have put some requests on your outline today. Some things that would maybe serve as prompts. Prayers of thanksgiving to say, God, thank you. You're amazing. Prayers for the future, that God would save more people. That God would use the teaching that happens through the lifeblood of our church to go forward and to impact people's lives. For miracles to happen, right? We want God's power to be on display. Miracles are not a thing for them. God's still just as big and just as strong today as he ever was. Praying for fruit, praying for provision, praying for wisdom and favor as we move through these projects. There's a lot that we could put on there.